Hello. So I don't entirely even know how to start this when I'm talking about sourdough because there's so many things to talk about with sourdough. But I just want to talk about sourdough lingo, kind of a 101, intro to sourdough, sourdough basics, whatever you want to call it. I make sourdough. I have a vegan and sourdough cookbook that has a lot of sourdough recipes. So again, like I have no order for this. I'm just going to talk and see what comes out. But I think the main thing to talk about to start is what is sourdough? What is sourdough starter? What is sourdough discard? What does it mean to have active starter? What's bulk fermentation? What's proofing? All of these words that seem daunting. And once you get into it, you really learn what they mean and it becomes really second nature. So it's all intimidating to start. And as you go, you're like, I got this. And you may question that a little bit as you go, but you do got this. Sourdough is basically bread that naturally rises through a naturally fermented process. Basically, sourdough starter is what you use to make your bread rise, and sourdough starter is just a mix of water and flour that is fermented with natural bacteria and makes this like natural wild yeast, which is what makes your bread rise, which is why you don't actually have to add yeast to your bread. So if you're making a classic hard crust sourdough bread, you need your starter, which is just flour and water that has been fermented, and flour, water, and salt. So in the end, it ends up just being flour, water, and salt. Again, of course, your starter's in there, but that's just flour and water. So all the ingredients in there are flour, water, and salt. Super simple, so helpful, so good for your body to digest, easier for your body to process. For many, many reasons, you don't have this list of like just ingredients from grocery store bread that is, not so great for you. Simple ingredients, naturally fermented, so it's easier for your body to digest and your gut gets all these unbelievable health benefits. That's what sourdough bread is. Sourdough starter. How do you make a sourdough starter? I chose whole wheat flour for my sourdough starter. Some people do all-purpose flour. The flour can change depending on who you are. If you want to do a gluten-free sourdough starter, which is possible, which I've done, I use brown rice flour because that's a really good one. You could try some others. A sourdough starter, as I mentioned, is basically sourdough, is basically flour and water that has natural bacteria and yeast that helps itself rise on its own. So to make a sourdough starter, you basically have to feed like close to even amounts of water and flour every day for about 7 to 9 days. And then you can start to see it double in size. But the longer you have a sourdough starter, the more you feed it, the better it is. It's easier for it to rise and fall. Just the older it gets, kind of, I feel like a wine, a fine wine, like, you want it aged and all of that. So I've been using mine for, oh gosh, I don't know, close to 2 years. I just left and had to come back. So I just remember that I was talking about sourdough starter. I don't know exactly where I left off, but what I did do is grab my sourdough discard to show a couple things. So let's talk about discard. Sourdough discard and sourdough starter, which this is my original sourdough starter, my OG. This is my discard. Sourdough starter, as we mentioned, is the flour and water that's fermented that you want to use in order to make bread. And when you're going to make bread, you feed your starter, and feeding means just giving it like even amounts of water and flour. So when I'm going to make bread and I have an active starter, and active means it's rising and falling, doubling in size every time you feed it. That means it's really active. When it's dormant and it's not active, you can put it in the fridge, or that's like before you feed it, that's the discard. It's called discard. It doesn't mean you actually discard it, because you can actually make a bunch of sourdough discard recipes. So in those discard recipes, you don't need sourdough starter that's active, like rising and falling. This wouldn't rise as much. but you get all the same health benefits and gut benefits that you would get in any of your sourdough discard recipes as you would from sourdough bread, because you have the sourdough starter, even though it's in its not active state. Phenomenal. There's so many discard recipes in my cookbook. I have a million of them. Sourdough pancakes, sourdough granola bars, sourdough muffins, sourdough tortillas, one of our favorites. The list truly goes on. Sourdough cobbler, which we have a video of, sourdough pizza. That's all made with sourdough discard. So again, sourdough discard specifically is sourdough starter that is not active, and you can cook with a lot of, there's a million discard recipes, phenomenal health benefits there. I keep this in the fridge pretty much indefinitely. Again, sourdough starter, active. This would double in size if we were using it. Another thing that you might hear in sourdough lingo is levain. I don't even know exactly how you say it, but that's basically taking some of your initial original sourdough starter and feeding that for bread, just so you aren't using everything from your like original starter, just taking maybe, let's say, like, if it's active and rising well, you could take 10 grams of this the night before you want to make bread and then feed it like 10 times that, so it has a really long time to eat, so that basically when you're ready to make bread in the morning, it had like a long time to rise. So you're just ready to go in the morning. So I would do like 10 grams of starter and like 100 grams of flour and water as a feeding in the evening, and then you would have plenty of starter, or in that case, levain for your bread. It's a lot. It's a lot. Don't get overwhelmed by all the lingo, because if you actually are going to make sourdough, or you want to start, or you want to learn, this will all be easily learned in time. Okay, so we saw our sourdough discard, sourdough starter. This is actually my gluten-free sourdough discard, and you can see it's a little different when it sits in the fridge. That's like what would be hooch on top, but hooch on like a discard one like this, I actually had to save it because in the past it got like, how do I explain this? When you leave this in the fridge for a really long time, you start getting like, it's this darker liquid on top, and that's known as hooch, which actually is like alcoholic and very strong. And some people dump it out. Some people mix it in because it gives you a little bit more of that sour, tart flavor. I kept this a long time ago. That's literally like when the longest I hadn't used my discard. And there was a bunch of hooch on top, and Billy made me save it because crazies drink this, and he still like thinks he's going to. I'm like, no, you're not. But it was worth showing in the video. So this is like hooch that was on top a long time ago of this discard. That's alcoholic, and you can mix it in. Doesn't mean that your stuff has gone bad. It's not mold or anything like that. Okay, so gluten-free sourdough discard is what this is, and I would just take a little bit of this and start feeding it. Since this one's gluten-free, this one I feed it brown rice flour, and so I would just feed a little bit at a time. I usually, when I take something out of the fridge to start feeding it for bread, I give it maybe like 3-ish feedings, so it's like maybe even 4 sometimes, so it's like really rising and falling really well, because when it's in the fridge, it's just kind of, like I said, it's this dormant state. So bring it out, bring it back to life with a few feedings. Again, a feeding just means giving it even amounts of flour and water. And use a scale if you're going to be doing sourdough, because flour and water doesn't like weigh evenly in cups if you're going to just do cups. Some people do that. You really can eyeball it too. You want it to be like your sourdough starter to be about the thickness of like pancake batter. What else? Where else do we want to go? Okay, so when you're making bread, there's a lot of different lingo in the bread making process. For example, bulk rise. That's once you've added your sourdough starter and your ingredients in, you have begun, that's bulk fermentation. Once you've added your sourdough starter in, you're starting this bulk fermentation process. Bulk rise is when you're giving your bread after you, actually, we should go back. Stretch and folds are when you literally stretch and fold the bread. And when you stretch and fold the bread, you usually do that 4 rounds, so like on each side, spaced every 30 minutes. So stretch and fold, wait 30 minutes, stretch and fold, wait 30 minutes, stretch and fold, wait 30 minutes, stretch and fold, wait 30 minutes. That really builds structure in your dough. It builds the gluten network. It gives you some of those beautiful like air pockets, and just a lot is done in those stretch and folds. It also like builds and binds your bread together. You can really tell throughout the process as well. You can go back and watch one of my sourdough videos and see that. That's stretch and folds. When you're done with your stretch and folds, then you're going to do your bulk rise. Your bulk rise is after the stretch and folds. I, in my climate, do about 4.5 hours, give or take, for my bread after you do your stretch and folds to double in size. And you just leave it out at room temperature, covered. And that's bulk rise. I do a cold proofing. Actually, before that, we shape our loaves. I shape my loaf, which is just like basically what it sounds like, shaping it into the ball shape or whatever your banneton shape is. A banneton is basically what you're going to use to hold your bread. Let me show you. These are bannetons, and we put there's banneton covers. You put in these, your bread goes in here upside down. It's just the name of what these are, banneton. Then I cover these, once the breads are in here, put them in the fridge overnight to cold proof. Cold proofing is super great for like a slower proof. Again, when you put everything, a slower rise, when you put everything in the fridge, again, it's like kind of like a pause, or like things aren't happening as fast. And the cold proofing is one of my favorite parts about it, is like you get this like really beautiful, like clean loaf that has like some firm structure versus just being really soft. And that's super easy for scoring. Scoring is one of the next sourdough lingo words. Scoring is when you're taking your bread lame, which is like a little razor, and when you're making your designs, or where your designs in the bread, or where you want the bread to open up. When you want the bread to open up, you do a really deep score, and that's where it's going to focus on rising. And if you didn't do that score, your bread would very likely like explode in the oven, because it just needs like a place to like relieve some of that pressure. So that's where your bread opens up, is where you do a deep score. The other stuff is just decorative designs. And that's again using a bread lame is what it's called as your scoring device. What else? We've covered sourdough starter, sourdough discard, what sourdough is, bulk rise, bulk ferment, cold proofing. What else? Scoring, bread lame, banneton. There's so many words. I'm sure there's a million more that I could talk about, but I feel like that's a good base on sourdough. And so I hope to see you along a sourdough journey. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Sourdough has changed my life, has changed my family's life in many ways. I'm so grateful for the gift of being able to make bread for people in my community, as well as for my family. And if you're prepared or motivated to go on the journey, I absolutely commend and encourage you to. Can be a little intimidating and daunting at first, but you got this. You got this. I believe in you. This is a sourdough sandwich loaf. Sourdough sandwich loaf, which uses flour, water, salt, starter, of course. But the additions in this one, I use avocado oil and maple syrup. Sometimes I'll use honey, not really anymore unless it's dandelion honey because we're plant-based. But I used to use honey. Some people use honey. And this just makes like a really soft, fluffier bread, like a sandwich loaf versus what I call classic, hard, really hard crust sourdough loaves that just use water, flour, salt, and your starter, which again, your starter is just fermented water and flour. So water, flour, salt. Beautiful. We can cut into this so you can see what a sourdough sandwich loaf looks like. So here we have our sourdough sandwich loaf. And this is my favorite thing to cut both classic and sandwich loaves with. It's like literally like a saw. It's amazing. But you can see just how smooth it goes. And I lift up the edges because I just don't like bringing these razors onto any kind of cutting board. So that's why I kind of do it in this way. Oop. Kind of let them fall off in order. And as you slice it, I mean, you can just see when you slice how like smooth and how easy it is to go through. The boys love, they really do, when I say the boys, my kids and my husband, love all of the sourdough breads, which is just, I'm grateful for, probably because they really don't know anything else. Also because it's delicious. But truthfully, I don't think my kids have ever had any like real like white bread like from the store. Anyways, I feel like sourdough sandwich bread is one of the best ones for like kids just because it's really light and fluffy, versus classic bread, which again, they eat it. They don't even seem to complain ever. They like it all. I don't think they notice, but I just feel like it's a little easier for them to chew a sourdough sandwich loaf versus a classic loaf. And when their teeth are, you know, still sensitive or coming in, I like to go with the sandwich loaf if I can. When I get to the end, I always flip it just so it's easier for me to cut. I guess it is easier for me to cut that way. And then I usually like go like this to the side. Tricks of the trade, right? Okay. So this is a sourdough sandwich loaf, freshly cut, beautiful, ready to go back in the bread box. This lasts us, what, 3 days maybe? Sometimes 2. But you can see sort of sourdough sandwich. And like, I don't always like roll it out flat with a rolling pin. If I did that with the sandwich loaves, then I'd probably get less like holes, but sourdough, man, it's okay to have holes. So it's just beautiful bread. You know, not all pieces have as many. Just beautiful sandwich loaf. Toast it right up, soft. You can see it like has its beautiful, like it's dense, but it's like not, it's soft, it's everything. It's everything you want it to be. For this loaf specifically, sometimes I'll use whole wheat. Whole wheat is my starter. So I always have complex carbs for my whole wheat starter base in every loaf, but I primarily use bread flour when I'm making sourdough sandwich loaves. Bread flour is more of a white flour, but it has higher protein content. So it's just a lovely kind of like white bread with high protein content, but also higher protein content, but also still has the complex carbs from the whole wheat starter. Beautiful. Toast these pieces up. This is a toasted piece. This is for the boys for lunch. Just showing you what it's like to put some butter on it. Beautiful. Listen to how crisp. See how beautiful that is.